To our webinar for Virtual Reunion Week 2020. This is Demystifying the Electoral College with President Marbach, and this will be led by Gail Towns from Marketing. And just wanted to remind everybody that there is a chat function on the bottom should you run into any technical issues. There is a Q&A function on the bottom as well. Should you have questions for the panelists, we will direct those and go live with those as well. Any other questions, please let us know. And I'm going to kick this over to Gail Towns to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Alicia Smith, who leads the alumni area in advancement now. So thank you very much, Alicia. My guest today, our guest, is no stranger to you. Dr. Marbach, a Philadelphia native, is, however, you may not know, a political scientist, which means, he's a go-to guy for all things political science. After finishing his undergraduate degree at LaSalle University, Dr. Marbach went on to earn both his master's degree and his doctorate degree in political science at Temple University, all while teaching political science and serving as assistant director at the time for Temple's Center on Federalism. He also has a distinguished background as a faculty member and a thought leader in the field, and he's put his political science savvy to work for many years at Seton Hall University, at LaSalle University, and since 2015 with us at Georgian Court. Along the way, his career work has included being an award-winning radio analyst. I think he has an Emmy in his office, or he has an award from the Associated Press in his office. He has also been a frequent media contributor and subject matter expert on New Jersey politics, which is worth an award in and of itself. He continues to contribute frequently to public programming here in New Jersey as well. Beyond that, Dr. Marbach is a past president of the New Jersey Political Science Association and has served on the Council of the American Political Science Association's section on federalism and intergovernmental relations. Say that fast. He is also a former fellow with the Pennsylvania Policy Forum and has been an active participant in the Global Dialogue on Federalism, sponsored by the Forum on Federations and International Associations for Centers for Federal Studies. So with that, it's a mouthful. I'd like to say welcome, Dr. Marbach.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you for that introduction. And it makes me feel pretty old with all that done. But I enjoy this opportunity to get to talk to our alumni and any students and any other interested parties about the Electoral College. This is something I had the opportunity to do 4 years ago, and thought it would be especially timely in this election cycle, given where popular vote is going and where the whole election is. So I welcome the questions from the audience and your questions to start off, Gail.
Excellent, excellent. And there are plenty of questions to be had here. Let's start just by laying the framework for our conversation today, Joe. First, we'll talk a little bit about the Electoral College. Tell us the basics. Secondly, what's the big deal? Why is everyone and their mother talking about the Electoral College? And then lastly, Electoral College reform. So I'd like to think of our conversation in 3 segments today, which should leave plenty of time for questions as well. But just to get us going, what is the Electoral College? What's the process? How does it work? Who's in the Electoral College?
Thank you, Gail. Yeah, the Electoral College, in a nutshell, is the mechanism by which we choose the President of the United States. The framework is written into the Constitution. It is a system that would be classified, I think, as more of a Republican with a small r, in the way we describe it, rather than democratic. So we don't directly vote for the president on that second Tuesday in November. We actually will be voting for a slate of delegates who are then pledged to a particular presidential candidate. And this stems back to the founding of the Republic and the Constitution that was created back in 1783 and then ratified in 1789. Um,
So how does it work?
yeah, so and as we go back then, I think one of those important elements is to understand in terms of historical context what that means. So this comes out of the 1780s, 1790s, when the country's very different. Who can vote is very limited. It's white property males by and large. Although in New Jersey, we did allow women to vote early on in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So that got changed when the women voted the wrong way, but that's another story and another presentation. But it reflects also the values of the revolution that it came out of. The American Revolution, in many ways, was a conservative revolution. And by conservative, I mean it kept in power essentially the same people who had power. So if you look at the delegates to the Continental Congress, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention, these are property owning, highly educated individuals who were leaders of their colonies, and they were leaders of the colonies become states. So essentially, the American Revolution just cast off, the British elite and replaced it with an American elite. And so the American elite really didn't trust popular government. Democratic government was generally considered mob rule. And you just couldn't trust the people to vote in the interest of the larger polity. And that meant the economic interest of those folks with property. So they put together a national government, the federal government, that has very limited democratic opportunities. If we look at the original system of government, it's only the House of Representatives that allowed for direct representation by the people, direct election by the people. The Senate was originally chosen by the state legislatures, and it represented the state governments. The president, chosen by this Electoral College, which was also an institution created or empowered by the state legislatures. So there wasn't a direct link to any kind of popular vote. It was really voting by the state legislatures. And then the federal system, again, appointed by the executive office, ratified by the legislature for a term of good behavior, which has translated into essentially a lifetime appointment for members of the federal judiciary, whether it's the Supreme Court or any of those other courts. So that's kind of the background. We're coming out of a system that is suspicious of direct democracy and puts in place these elements to allow the elite in society to maintain control over that federal government.
So that brings us, that gives us a bit of historical context. Who are the members of the Electoral College today?
Well, despite the intentions of the founders, they thought the members of the Electoral College would be members of society with long-standing in the community, people that could be trusted because they would have mature judgment, they would understand the values, they would be well respected by their citizens. That system lasted the first two elections. And in those first two elections, George Washington was the obvious choice for president. So there wasn't any contention. It changes as we get into actually the fourth election. John Adams wins in the third election in a close vote as he contests the election with Thomas Jefferson. And after that election of 1796, Jefferson realizes that if he can organize his supporters in the different states by creating a national political party, he can control who the members of the Electoral College are and ensure his election as president. And Jefferson was a master at this, and he's the first one. He founds American political parties, and he does such a good job, and he has members of the political party that are so loyal and faithful to him that he gets the most votes, and his nominee for vice president gets the same number of votes, Aaron Burr. So in 1800, we have our first contested election in the Electoral College, and the added rules of who would become president get kicked in, and that election goes to the House of Representatives. And I'll talk a little bit about that down the line, but your question was, who are the electors in the Electoral College? Since 1800, the electors in the Electoral College, those delegates, are loyal members of the political parties that are nominating the candidates for president. So it's not the wise elderly statesmen that the founders thought it would be. It's actually now people who are loyal to the party standard bearers. And that's been our history since 1800.
So this picture, some of us may have in our minds of a noble statesman, stateswoman who is, looking at things through rose-colored glasses. Get rid of that and get rid of the stockings, get rid of the wig, all of that stuff in our heads.
That went right out the window once Washington announced that he wasn't going to run for a third term, and bare knuckle politics came out in American style, as they would.
Jersey style.
Jersey style, yes. Well, it's very appropriate in that way.
So the Electoral College has 538 members?
It has 538 members. That is equal to the number of representatives in Congress, plus 3 representatives for the District of Columbia. So we have 435 members in the House of Representatives, and we have 100 senators, 2 from each of the 50 states. So when you add those together, you get 535. And then when you add in the 3 representatives of the District of Columbia, which was added in the 1970s, we end up with the total number in the Electoral College of 538. In order to be elected president, you need 50% plus 1, so you need an absolute majority to become elected. And that means you need 270 votes in the Electoral College to become president. So those are the only votes that matter. So, on November 2nd or 3rd, whenever we're voting coming up, that's really just an indirect way of showing the preference of a state towards which candidate. And in most states, the preferential vote is tied to who's awarded the delegates, which candidate gets the most votes. And it's always been his, except for 2016 with Hillary Clinton, his or her slate of delegates are then given the position of voting in the Electoral College. The actual vote of the Electoral College takes place in the second week of December. So this year, the actual vote for president will take place on December 14th. And that will occur when the members of the Electoral College will gather in their respective state capitals. They'll be handed paper ballots of who to vote for. They'll mark down their choice. Those ballots will then be sealed. They'll be collected, and then they will be sent to Washington. And the president of the Senate will count those votes in January. And that's kind of the technical details of how the Electoral College operates.
And that's the 270. And often we hear the number 538, and we hear about the 270. And there's a website that you shared with us a few years ago, I believe. Actually, I think that was maybe the 538 website. But one thing that you've talked about in recent months is the road to 270. The road to 270.com. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a great website, and we can share it with the audience now. It's the road to 270.com. And here, and Alicia, if you'll reset the map, hit that reset. This is a map of the United States, and it breaks down where consensus polling at least, indicates where people are likely to vote. So you see the dark red or the dark blue indicate states that are relatively safe for either Biden or Trump. And then you have different shades of blue or pink that kind of indicate the support for Biden or Trump, and is it stronger? Is it weaker as it's developing based on the outcomes of these various polls? What's also interesting is that you see we've got about 5 states and a congressional district that are not quite clear. It's a little bit up in the air. These are the battleground states that President Trump and Vice President Biden are spending a lot of their time trying to woo voters to ensure their victory. As our viewers can see, right now, the polls seem to indicate that Joe Biden's ahead and can count on likely 290 votes. We saw a very similar poll 4 years ago, and Hillary Clinton was leading by about the same amount. So what wasn't counted on at that point were 3 northern states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and those were elections that actually went for President Trump in a very narrow margin. So that's part of what goes on. And can we trust some of the polls that are out there today? But essentially, what we see with this map is a breakdown of the states, and each number affiliated with the states is equivalent to their representatives in Congress. So California, the largest state, has 53 members in the House and 2 U.S. senators. So therefore, California is awarded 55 votes in the Electoral College. On the other side of the coin, you have Delaware with 1 U.S. representative and 2 senators, and so Delaware gets a minimum of 3 Electoral College votes. Same for Vermont and the District of Columbia. A few other states, North Dakota, South Dakota, have that small number. So this is really a reflection of the population of the United States captured by a state-by-state process.
Joe, while the map is still up, can we talk a little bit about what we've come to know as battleground states? Are those the states that we see in tan?
Yeah, so those are the states that are kind of coming up in the tan color. These are again states where the election could go either way. If Alicia colored all the brown states pink or red, and then we were able to see the chart, we see how this affects the president's likelihood of improving his standing. But even with all those 5 battleground states, it only brings President Trump to 247. So he's really got to start to focus on some of those lighter blue states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, perhaps Minnesota. He did pretty well there 4 years ago. Arizona, Nevada. Those become battleground states also, where the president is trailing under current polls, but still within perhaps a margin of victory, depending on what turnout might be. So there, as Alicia says, if he can win Pennsylvania and any of those states, it becomes almost a landslide for Trump. And that's, to some extent, that's what happened 4 years ago. The popular polling, for some reason or another, undercounted Trump's support. And I recall giving this presentation and telling the audience, this election is going to trigger on what happens in Florida and what happens in Ohio. And if Hillary Clinton wins either of them, I can go to bed early because I know what the election is going to look like. But as the night wore on, President Trump won Florida, he won Ohio, and then the states, as I mentioned, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all turned from that light blue to a shade of pink, and then we ended up with the results we have, and President Trump then won the election.
And one of the themes, as we talk about these states that are light blue or tan, and to some degree pink, because they can be in play, one of the factors that has been pulled through all of these conversations is race, gender, economics. Um, but one of the things that you shared with me before is that it really comes down to two factors, not necessarily race, not necessarily gender, and not necessarily economics alone, but where and how we live. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when we've done the analysis then of the 2016 election to really just determine, where was the Clinton support, where did Trump support come from? How did Clinton lose? I mean, she received more than 3 million more votes than Trump, but lost this election. And I'll delve into that a little bit. But a lot of what you see, and you can kind of glean it from this map. If you look at where those dark blue states are, it's essentially bi-coastal, with the exception of Illinois. And it tends to reflect highly urbanized areas. And certainly in Illinois, you've got Chicago, the third largest city in the United States. So Illinois is certainly under an urban influence. And this tends to be a better way of explaining how the country is voting. And then when you add on those layers of racial demographics, income demographics, ethnic demographics, you tend to find that our urban areas are more diversified. They generally are more wealthy. And those areas tend to vote overwhelmingly Democratic. And this has been a trend that we've seen over the last 24 years in the United States. We can go back to the elections of Bill Clinton, and you start to see this divide in the United States of the Democrats winning urban areas and the Republicans winning rural areas. And then a lot of the battleground then becomes those suburban areas, the intersection between the two, and which candidates can win those suburban areas. And so sometimes you'll hear terms like, what are suburban housewives doing? How are they voting? They can become very influential in this type of election. So what we've increasingly seen is this urban-rural divide in the United States, and it comes as a reflection of values and a reflection of voting patterns that we're seeing in the state. And this is often called flyover America, right? You go from California to New York, and the rest of the country is the flyover areas. But because of our federal system, we empower the states, and smaller states get more of a voice in the Electoral College than do the larger states. Even though California has 55 votes, that's not proportional to the real size and influence of California. Delaware gets 3 votes, which is akin to about a half a percentage point, but its actual population is about a quarter of a percentage point of the U.S. population. So Delaware is overrepresented. California, to some extent, is underrepresented. And why does then Clinton get 3 million more votes than Trump and lose? Well, the Clinton votes are concentrated in those urban areas. And so if she wins New York City by 80% of the vote, well, that is 29% more of the vote than she needed. She really only needed to win New York City by 51% of the vote, and then she's essentially carrying New York State. But there's kind of an overkill, and that happens in some of these large states, California, New York, Illinois, where you win by really very, very large margins, but it doesn't help you win any more votes in the Electoral College because it's set by the number of electors. The other thing that we need to talk about, and I'll let you get a question in, but I don't want to lose this, is 48 of the 50 states vote on a winner-take-all basis. And that also helps candidates focus their attention on those so-called battleground states, because you want to win Pennsylvania because you're going to get 20 electoral votes. It's not going to be based on the popular vote. So if Joe Biden gets 55% of the vote and Donald Trump gets 45%, Biden's not going to get 11 votes and Trump 9 votes. Biden's going to get all 20. And that's true, throughout the country, with the exceptions of Maine and Nebraska. And we can see on this map that they're colored, in this diagonal pattern. And that reflects that they use a slightly different system in awarding their delegates to the Electoral College. Both Nebraska and Maine award delegates based on the vote in the congressional districts. So whichever candidate wins the congressional districts gets that vote from that district. And then whichever candidate receives the most votes across the state, that candidate gets the 2 extra votes that would reflect the votes in the Senate. So this winner take all is done by the states to allow them to maximize their influence. And if they're a battleground state, they get a lot of attention. So, Pennsylvania is one of those battleground states. I live in the Philadelphia market, and President Trump made 3 visits to Pennsylvania just yesterday, and he sends Vice President Pence. Joe Biden has been here constantly, and he likes to remind people that he was born in Scranton, trying to take advantage of those Pennsylvania roots, and his wife was from Philadelphia. So the battleground states become ever more important because of that winner-take-all process in awarding the members to the Electoral College.
So you answered the question that was actually in my head, and that was, so 2 out of the last 5 elections went to the candidate who did not have the most popular votes. I think you answered in that what happened. It was this configuration, this sliding scale of winner takes all. Is that correct?
Exactly. And in fact, Gail, we could have an election where a candidate could win just 11 states. And he or she could win those 11 states by 1 vote each and lose the rest of the country, not even compete in the rest of the country. But if you can win the 11 votes, California, Texas, Illinois, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Florida, these ones that are in the teens, you can come up with 270 votes from those 11 states. And if you win all those 11 states by 1 vote more than your opponent, you can capture the Electoral College, and you can lose all the other 39 states 100%. You wouldn't even compete in those states. That's the way the system is designed to empower the state government. So it's a reflection of our federal system of government. And the federal system of government says that the national government is made up of the component parts. The component parts are the state governments. So we don't have a national election on November 3rd. We have 51, including District of Columbia, 51 separate elections for president, and then the delegates to the Electoral College are allocated based on those 51 elections.
So, Joe, does that also answer this question? I feel like you're in my head. Why not just create a popular vote? Why not just abandon what we've known for I don't know how long now? And we'll talk a little bit more about reform, but why not the popular vote?
Well, it's because of that federal system. When the founders created the system, they were not fans of democracy. They felt that the masses were by and large uneducated. The masses could be swayed by a demagogue. The masses could vote in people who might do away with property rights or might decide to, empty the state treasuries or devalue money. One of the things that often happen, and loosen credit and, make life a little bit easier maybe for working people. Couldn't have that. So we had to create kind of these barriers to power, and it reinforced what was going on with the elite. So we've never come close to a national election of the president. In fact, even the direct election of U.S. senators only happens in the early 20th century. So we've only had direct election of U.S. senators for about 100 years now. That was something that was left to the state legislatures to decide. So our movement towards democracy has been a slow one. It reflects who we've empowered to vote. And as I said, in the 1780s, it was generally white propertied males. I said New Jersey was the exception. We did allow white women to vote. And then it's not until after the Civil War that we are allowing the newly freed slaves to vote. We expand the franchise slowly but surely in changing the age. Women aren't permitted to vote until the early 20th century. So it's just been a slow process of democratization in the United States, not only of who's eligible to vote, but also the reflection in our political institutions.
And just for the audience, I said that he is a political scientist. So there you have it, indeed. I want to just go back a few years, not so much 1776, but maybe 1968, 69, when we had one of our congressional leaders at the time, Birch Bayh, B-A-Y-E. And I have struggled with that pronunciation because I always want to call him Birch Bay. But Birch Bayh put forth an amendment for review, pushed for an amendment rather, for reform to the Electoral College. And this had also come on the heels of two other amendments that he'd worked on, the 25th and the 26th. But for whatever reason, that Electoral College idea and ideals were not budging. And I know there was a lot happening in the late 60s, early 70s, but tell us more about the reform movement around this and why now is or is not a time where we'll see significant change.
That's such a timely question, Gail. What I think some of the viewers should realize is that people in general aren't happy with the Electoral College. There have been about 800 amendments offered in Congress to change the Electoral College. And we're only 220 years old as a country, so about 20 amendments a year come forward. Or is what's my math's off on that? Is it 40, right? 40 times a year we want to try to change it. It's just not 4 times a year. It's a lot. Yeah, I'm off. 4 times a year every year we're trying to reform the Electoral College. It's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to amend the U.S. Constitution. First, there are multiple ways, but the most used way is that you get 2/3 of a vote from the House and the Senate, and then you need 3/4 of the state legislatures to approve the amendment. So the first starting place is generally, the House and the Senate. And Birch Bayh was able to get the 2/3 vote in the House in 1968, but the Senate refused to even consider his bill. So it died there on the Senate floor. So it never went to the states. And even if it went to the states, there would have probably been a reluctance on the states to have embraced a direct election of the president, because it would have undermined their authority in influencing the presidential election. As it is, the state by state 51 elections really empowers state governments, and they can craft electoral systems that reflect their values, or are like Maine or Nebraska have, or it could just be to reflect and maximize their political power. And a direct election of the president does not do that. So that's by and large why it's met with so much resistance, even though popularly the Electoral College is probably the least popular feature of our federal system.
I want to depart from my list of questions and ask you to answer an audience question. I don't know if you can see it, Joe, but I'm going to read it aloud for our audience. And that is, Are the Electoral College delegates mandated to vote for the winning candidate in their state? Can they go rogue?
As a matter of fact, they can go rogue, and they have gone rogue from time to time. This is often known as the faithless elector. So someone is pledged to vote for a particular candidate, but then on that second Tuesday in December, they can't bring themselves to vote for that individual, so they write in someone else's name. It does happen. I wouldn't say frequently, but it's not unusual for it to happen in any given election cycle. It has never impacted the results. Generally, you see a faithless elector for a loser, the candidate who was not getting the most votes. So it might be a symbolic vote. So if Joe Biden were to lose, somebody might, a faithless elector from New Jersey is going to be a Democratic state. If you went back to the 270 map, New Jersey's always blue, California's always dark blue. So our 12, our 14 votes are all going to go for Joe Biden. But if somebody was really unhappy with the way the party was going, they might vote for Bernie Sanders, just to say we need to move more to the left, something like that. So it hasn't impacted the election. Now, a number of states have passed laws to require the members of the Electoral College to vote for the delegate they're pledged to. And the Supreme Court has upheld those laws because the states are responsible for conducting these elections. So state law takes precedent. But it's not clear how enforceable that would be. The faithless elector might get jail time. And there are some provisions, some states claim the authority to replace that elector. So that means that when the electors go, they're not casting secret ballots anymore. They're casting ballots in plain view. And if somebody wrote Bernie Sanders instead of Joe Biden, that person would be knocked out, and a faithful elector would replace that individual. That kind of process has been upheld by the Supreme Court as one of the prerogatives of the states. Only a few states have actually passed that kind of legislation.
Wow. So it's not about not going to church as a faithless delegate or elector.
No.
Really about sticking to what you said, keeping your promise.
Right. Gail, I'd like to share that 270 site again with the audience, because people might kind of wonder what's going on. So Alicia, if you could possibly call that up again. This is a great tool, and it's actually a great time waster too. On the site, I think if you scroll down, there's a chance where it just runs the different scenarios, and it goes. Maybe it's in that box under the map library. If you click on that box, I think if you go to it might be the polling map at the top. That's not what we're in, right? And one of these you can hit the reset button, and it runs. So it's not one of those. This is the one that has the site where you can you can go back and look at what happened. I think go to that predicted one. I don't know if that's got also, it might be at the top of the page then. If there's one of these that has an ability to run the election yourself. Oh, the 2020 election simulator. If you see it up in the right-hand corner. Yeah, right there. Hit that one, please. So, for folks at home, if you're a numbers geek like myself, you can hit run simulation, and it runs the simulation as the votes start coming in. And then you get to see what a path to victory for Trump might be, what a path to victory for Biden might be. And as the states come in, and you can see this is going to be, this was a kind of a closer election, where Trump takes Pennsylvania, but he loses Florida and Michigan and Wisconsin. But you can run this again. And so if you hit it again, it keeps running them. In some of these scenarios, you actually can find a tie where each candidate gets 269 votes.
And then what happens, Joe?
And then what happens, Gail? Then what happens is the election goes to the House of Representatives to select the president, and the Senate selects the vice president. So in that particular special election, where there's no candidate has a majority, and this might happen if we had a third party candidate and he or she received some votes and we just didn't have somebody receiving 270, the election goes into the House, and the House votes as delegations. So there would be 50 votes in the House, one for each delegation. And California's 53 votes would be tallied, and California would get one vote, and Delaware with one representative gets one vote. Again, a feature of our federal system empowering the states. And then the states would vote, and we would generally expect them to vote along party lines. The current configuration in the House of Representatives is that Republicans control 26 state delegations. The Democrats control 22 or 23, depending on how you count Michigan. Michigan has 8 Democrats, 7 Republicans, and 1 independent who generally votes with the Republicans. So it's generally considered split. And Pennsylvania is also split, 9 Democrats, 9 Republicans. So if there was an electoral college vote today, Donald Trump would likely win. However, that ratio is subject to change because it's based on the election results of 2020. So can the House flip? Can the Democrats flip enough seats in Congress to take control of the House delegations? That's something that Nancy Pelosi has been trying to campaign for. And we've got some states like Alaska with 1 delegate where it's almost a toss-up. Montana, the same thing. It could be possible for the Democrats to get 24, 25 votes. But right now, polling seems to favor the Republicans. So the Republicans are likely to have a majority in the House of Representatives. And that's the candidate with the most votes would win. It doesn't matter if they get 25 or 24, if enough states were split, their votes wouldn't count. So that's how the president would be elected. The Senate would elect the vice president based on each senator having 1 vote. So it's the normal rules of the Senate. And in
so
that
you could have a mixed ticket. I mean,
you could have a mixed ticket, especially if the Democrats capture the Senate, as some are suggesting they might in 2020. So you could
Joe,
have.
what is the timing on that tiebreaker?
What's that?
What is the timing on that tiebreaker? If there's ever a tiebreaker with the House of Representatives, do they cast their ballots in December or?
No, they would cast their ballots in January. After the new Congress is sworn in, then the votes from the Electoral College are counted. So it's the new Congress that then selects the new president.
This feels like the tax code. I mean, all of these if thens, then that variables, just so many to understand.
Yeah, and they generally don't come into play because of our 2-party system. Even when we've had serious third-party candidates, the winner-take-all system in the states means that the candidate with a plurality of votes, whoever gets the most votes, wins all those delegates in 48 states. So even third-party candidates, and in 1968 it was George Wallace. We had Ross Perot before. They've never been able to significantly attract enough votes to win any electoral college votes. and change the election in any significant way. It's really gone to the two-party system, and so that discipline within the party is really what changes or shapes the outcome in the Electoral College. Members of the Electoral College are faithful members of the political party. So while you have an occasional faithless elector, by and large, the members of the Electoral College are dyed-in-the-wool Democrats or diehard Republicans, and that's how they're going to vote.
Joe, we have 2 questions in the queue and about 13 minutes left. One, are the electors decided upon before Election Day, and who chooses them? I think you covered a little bit of that, but if you could reiterate who chooses them and when they're chosen.
Yeah, so the members of the Electoral College, each party will provide a slate of electors. They're chosen by the state political parties, and then they're nominated and provided. So the state legislatures recognize those slates of parties as the official representatives or those who would be named to the Electoral College. So the state legislatures defer to the political parties who name those delegates, and then those delegates are often chosen in consultation with the candidates. Because there may be cases where the candidate wants to honor a friend or a longtime supporter or somebody who's been a big donor in some way or another. Sometimes it's just symbolic. Somebody's been that Democrat who's voted in 50 straight elections or something like that, and so they've capped off their career in politics, and you want to recognize them, and so it's an honorific award or an honorific nomination to the Electoral College.
Here's another good question, especially since we just looked at the map. For those folks who are in battleground states, like you said, you're in Metro Philadelphia, Joe, and the president's been there 3 times. Joe Biden's been there 2 or 3 times in the last few weeks. So we know everybody loves Philadelphia. We know everyone loves Pennsylvania in terms of it being a place to cultivate votes. But if you're in a non-swing state, do you feel like you should even go? How do you encourage people to vote in non-swing states? We have a participant here today who said they waited in line for 2 hours because it was the right thing to do. Not everyone feels that way.
Well, I think what we have to remember is, it's not just the presidential election that we're voting for. I mean, that certainly drives most voters. They want to get out, and it's the most visible race. But you're also voting in New Jersey. We're also voting for a U.S. Senator. Cory Booker is up for re-election. You're also voting for your members of the House. So every seat in the House is up for re-election this year. There are a number of, not in New Jersey, but in most of the other states. Not New Jersey and Virginia are kind of on odd years for electing state officials, but in most other states, there are races for governor, races for state assembly or state legislature, state senate. Many cases there are city elections, local elections, county elections that are involved. So while your vote at the very top of the ticket may not be very meaningful, and if you're voting in New Jersey, if you're a Republican voting in New Jersey, your vote's not very meaningful because New Jersey's just overwhelmingly Democratic, and it has been in election cycles, and that's what all the polling tells us. But you can still have an impact in a House race, in local races, and that's where the future is. That's where future candidates come from. The next wave of members of the House are going to come from county politics or the state legislature. The next senator is going to come from a big city or the House of Representatives, or it might even be another millionaire. We often do that in New Jersey too. But you're going to have some influence that way. So, while we focus on the presidential, we can't lose sight of so many other races, and especially local races, that have such a direct impact on our lives. Things like, how often is your trash going to be collected? Is your snow going to be plowed? Are your schools going to be well funded? Those those sorts of things that impact our everyday lives. And that's why it is important to get out and exercise your right to vote.
I think that's a great point to make about the pipeline. I know that I've heard some people say they're just really looking forward to 2024 to see, what gets put forth in that year as well. We have a question from Rose, and she writes, "We currently have a popular vote in November, plus the Electoral College vote in December. If we were to change to a popular vote only, Joe, no Electoral College, what would keep us from the flyover nation scenario, where only the less rural East Coast and West Coast areas have substantial representation?" I think I read that right, but you understand what she's asking.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the concerns, that you would have the concentration in the large urban areas, in particular those that could get out to vote. Very perceptive question. It would mean that candidates would, by and large, ignore most of the country, because they're such smaller populated states. Um, you pay some attention to them, but it wouldn't be worth placing your resources. Right? Any election is, it's when we talk about politics, and we've got a new political science major, so I look forward to getting into the classroom and chatting with students in that. But one of the basic ways of defining politics is determining who gets what. So it's the allocation of resources. So even electoral politics is the allocation of your resources. And to Rose's point, if you're a candidate, where are you going to spend the most of your time? You're going after where the most votes are concentrated. So you would be focusing on the largest states, California, those 11 states I talked about, where you could win the election. Those would be the ones where you would focus most of your attention. And maybe it's even the top 20 states. But what happens to the other 30? They would largely get ignored. So I think I think that's one of the factors when you ask that question, Gail. Why doesn't this pick up any momentum? Well, there's no incentive for Oklahoma, for Missouri, to change the system, because they do benefit. They get some political attention, but then they can maximize their votes that way. And candidates, maybe not in the latter days of the election, aren't focused on them, but during the primary season and immediately after elections, they're getting some attention. So that's all part of it. It's the allocation of resources.
That is that's a very rich response, Joe. As we get ready to close, I think you've already mentioned the fact that we have a new political science major, that sits at the intersection. While it is true political science, it sits at the intersection. Sorry about my dog. Of history and geography and some other interdisciplinary topics, if I'm not mistaken, and intersects with our Mercy mission, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, definitely. The focus of the political science degree that we put together is very interdisciplinary. Students will be rooted in the history of the United States and the world, as this is not just rooted on the American. It'll have probably a strong bias there because of the type of nation that we are. But you're right, and social justice will be a significant component of it. So it does tackle some of those areas that is the core of our Mercy education. Our strategic compass wants to help create an informed student body that can influence and shape a just and compassionate world. And I think this degree is going to help inform students, whether they're majors or minors, or they're just going to take a course to understand what their political system looks like. They're going to learn and then understand how they can be empowered to help change that world. And immediately it is through voting. But as Anita Perez, our CIC, Council of Independent Colleges speaker, who's been on campus today, she talks to students about how they can get involved in a myriad of ways, whether they run for office, raise money for someone, or just engage in dialogue. And that's what I hope today was all about. Whether you're a diehard supporter of President Trump or a diehard supporter of Joe Biden, coming together to understand how our system works is very important as part of that dialogue. To understand it's not a perfect system, and that the rules of the game often shape who the winners will be. And why, it explains why President Trump won 4 years ago, even though he lost the popular vote.
We've learned so much today, Joe. Thank you so much. This is a lot. I feel like I couldn't look at the camera and like take notes at the same time. Plus, I don't know. I was hoping you wouldn't quiz me later. So hopefully you give me a little bit of grace on that. Again, I wanted to thank everyone for participating. We had more than 24 folks with us today, and there is going to be a rewatch option, that is a replay. Look for that link soon. It will come from our friend Alicia Smith, who you saw at the top of the hour. She also wanted me to remind you that we have other great virtual events this week, including yoga, virtual yoga, nursing discussions, alumni prayer service, is planned, and more. If you didn't sign up and you still want to participate in some of these things, you can just send an email to alumni@georgian.edu. That is alumni@georgian.edu. Also, enjoy the rest of the week in general, and we just want to thank you so much for being engaged, being willing to be informed, and to be connected with your alma mater. Again, thank you, Dr. Marbach, for this great discussion. I think there was something for everyone to take away, and we look forward to being in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.